Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to another episode of Arthur's Roundtable. Super excited today to have uh, our guest, but more importantly, Mary Fronteras is joining us today, who we can argue is my wife, but she's not really, but I wish she would be. And she's not only here because she is, but she also has a keen interest of subject matter today, and also good friends with Paul, who is our guest, Paul Hutchinson. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So let me frame it out for you today. We're going to talk about what many of you know is a popular movie called Sound of Freedom, and we're going to get into the detail of how that all came about. And Paul is about to publish a book on that. So this is somewhat of a book tour, but we're going to cover a lot of ground. So, Paul, thank you for being here today. We've been friends for almost 10 years, and so welcome.
We've been around the world.
Yes, indeed. We have been around the world.
Absolutely love you guys. What a beautiful couple you
Thank
are.
you, you and Vanessa. So let's start with the beginning. Salt Lake City, business development. Let's start with Bridge, and then we'll quickly go through there and then go into how you did all the undercover work for child trafficking and that sort of thing. So let's start with that.
Absolutely. Well, I've always been somewhat of a serial entrepreneur. Had my first big exit at 29 years old. Had a company that helped people overcome anxiety and depression disorders. We had an audio program, and we had a coaching program. I had 50,000 people a month calling in off of our infomercial, and we provided all the back end coaching, et cetera. I sold that company for $20 million when I was 29 years old. Now, it was in stock, restricted stock, and it was in a pink sheet company. I was naive at the time. I didn't know that was a bad idea.
No liquidity, yeah.
No liquidity. I had some, we had a couple million to work with. And then from there started investing. I wanted to invest in real estate. That seemed like the smart thing to do. And I realized within about a year that if I didn't hire guys smarter than me, I was going to lose all my money in real estate. I was throwing a spec house here and whatever else, and I thought, I don't know what I'm doing, And so I met a guy by the name of John Pennington. John had done about $9 million a year in import-export, and he knew how to make sure we weren't going to lose a container load of things for the company we were working with, and they needed some bridge loans. So we started a company called Bridge Loan Capital, or Block. And we provided short-term hard money lending, short-term asset-based lending. We started out with companies that needed factoring and purchase order financing. And then within a couple of years, we moved exclusively to real estate, where we
private debt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Would have a developer that had, he had $200,000 that was going hard on a piece of property that he had to close on it within a certain period of time, but he needed another 3 or 4 months to get his bank financing. So we would do the loan on that property, but we would also collateralize it by his house and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we were well collateralized, but we could perform within 24 hours sometimes with a couple $1 million.
Certainty of close is valuable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we were using my money and John's and some others, and we within a couple years, we had loans out on about $100 million worth of property. And it was within our fund and some other syndication stuff. And we hired a guy, and this is important, I think, in building companies. I hired a guy by the name of Don Hartman. Don's resume was the most impressive piece of paper I'd ever seen. He had raised $14 billion to bail out the Asian debt crisis. He had a 160+% return on his investment fund. He was LDS, he was Mormon, and wanted to raise his family in Utah, but he was overqualified for everything here. So he jokes and says, Paul found me walking around Salt Lake with an unemployed sign. I'll work for equity.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, why would he bother with you guys at that juncture in your development, right?
Well, there was nobody in Utah that that really intrigued him. And we were building our business with integrity. We were building it right from the beginning. And I remember early on with John, he tells the story a lot. People say, did you see it? Could you visualize it? He goes, no, but Paul did. We were in a little office so small we would bump elbows turning around. And he tells the story how I'd hang up a call, trying to raise $25,000 by Friday. And I'd turn around and I'd say, John, we're going to be $1 billion.
Right. Dr. Evil, right.
And he would say, Paul, we need $25,000 by Friday, right? Yeah. And so we were building it right from the beginning. And when we presented to Don what we were creating, we had to give him a heavy duty 6-figure income and equity in the company. But the advantage there was neither me nor John had the credibility to go after Morgan Stanley and have him write a $300 million check.
He had the Rolodex,
Yeah. So that was the beginning of building out the team. And an important transition was in December of 2006. Don had been with us a few months. He came into my office. Again, we had Bridge Loan Capital was our company. And he said, Paul, we're in trouble. I said, like, we are the fund? He goes, no, we are the country, probably the whole world. He said, we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar problem. This is before he saw the 2008 crisis happening before
in 2006.
Exactly. Yeah. He said, and if you don't change, you're going to be upside down with everybody in your space. You can't be doing hard money. You can't be doing bridge loans. He said, you're really good at raising money. You're really good at running a fund. He said, but you need some real estate adults who know how to
do
manage
the underwriting,
the assets.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we pivoted. We decided to focus on multifamily. We found a company called Bridge Property Management, and we were Bridge Loan Capital. And they had never run a fund before, but they were managing multifamily. And so we decided we ended up buying 60% of their company in an exchange for $20 million. We didn't have the cash, but we did a deal where we would pay them out of the growth of the company. And our deal was I would raise $350 million over a period of 3 years, matched 2-to-1 by our institutional leverage, would have $1 billion of new assets for them to manage. If I didn't do that, then they had a claw back, they had the company back. Well, 3 years later, I hadn't raised $300 million. I had raised $1 billion. Matched 2-to-1 by institutional leverage, we were over $3 billion in new assets. And so that created what ended up being a $48 billion in assets under management. Now, I didn't build it to 48. I built it to somewhere just under 20 billion when I retired in 2017. They ended up going public after I left, but the company that John and I founded was Bridge Investment Group, and then it morphed into the public company that you know of today.
So 2008 through 2017, I mean, that is a short period of time to raise that much money. And obviously it did well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it helped. I joke and tell people I can sell ice cream to an Eskimo, but it helps when I got the best ice cream on the planet, right? And you
had a great institutional salesperson, right?
We did. So I knew I was doing the arm-to-arm combat, right? Raising money from high net worth investors. The first 100 million that we brought in was all high net worth guys, right? Because we didn't have the credibility to go after the institutions. Yeah. After we brought in that first 100 million, then we could get, these bigger institutions to start writing 100 and 200, 300 million dollar checks.
How much of it was the institutional investors were domestic as opposed to sovereign wealth funds and other parts?
In the beginning, the first few 100 million, we had Fidelity came in with a $100 million commitment early on, just right after we passed 100 of our own, and so they came in with a big chunk, and then from there, the other advantage that I had was that Don, the guy that we hired early on, that told me the sky was going to fall in, Don was the former head of he worked with Citigroup, and he was the head of the Financial Institutions Research Division in Asia. So he had all this credibility with Asian banks, including his old boss, who was Bob Morris. And I remember flying to Hong Kong. Bob was the head of the investment bank of Citi in Asia, back when Citi was the largest corporation on earth from a capitalization standpoint, right?
Before Sandy Wow.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So mega credibility. And I remember we flew in, we were hoping that Bob would write us a $20 million check.
Yeah.
We're sitting there at his desk. I have the private offering memorandum and the pitch book, and I push, and he pushes them back across the desk. He said, I don't need to see any of that. And I'm thinking, shit, we wasted a trip to Hong Kong, right? And then he said, I've been watching you for the last 6 months. He looks at me and he points at me. He says, I know more about your bio than you do. I'm like, oh, shit, what's on my bio, right? He said, I think you've built a fantastic team. I love your vision and what you're creating. I don't want to give you $20 million. I want to give you $300 million, and I want to own the GP.
Yeah.
Now, Don didn't want to work for him again. I didn't want another boss. We actually turned him down because we didn't want to have him owning the GP. Came back to the table a number of months later with the same commitment, the $300 million commitment, with a like a 40% ownership in the GP. But more important than that, a commitment of him being full-time with us to help us raise billions of dollars
so
later.
He catalyzed the growth in that part of the world.
So you have Bob Morris on your team. Now Morgan Stanley writes you a $300 million check.
Yeah. Super interesting. What was the name of that movie about the 2008?
Big Short. That's what I was thinking about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like what Don was.
Yeah.
I mean, he saw that crisis. He says the sky's going to fall in. He said if you don't change, you're going to be upside down with everybody in this asset class.
Was it? I lived through 2008, but I wasn't a big real estate investor at the time. Were the valuations, besides the collateral mortgage obligation nonsense, were the valuations just so depressed that you could go in and get you were bridge financing, but did you have to take over a bunch of properties?
Well, here's what happened. The properties that we thought we were good, we were 70% loan to value on a piece of land that a developer, and we had full, appraisals and everything else. Those pieces, boom, they dropped like by half. So now we're in the red on these things. So luckily we were able to position ourselves, and because he saw it early enough, we were able to get out of all of them except for 2 or 3 of those properties. But then what happened was we became, within now Bridge Investment Group instead of Bridge Loan Capital, Bridge Investment Group became one of the first companies in the country. And we actually called Real Estate Opportunity Capital, the ROC funds is what we kind of called ourselves at that point. But we became one of the first funds in the country to be qualified on a top-level purchasing platform with all the GSEs, Freddie, Fannie, HUD, FDIC. So when a bank had 30 days to live, we would get a phone call. And by then, the bank president's willing to negotiate. He realizes 30 days.
Get it off
now,
my books. Yeah.
He's out of a job. His shareholders have a big fat zero. So if we come in and we say, okay, that portfolio of apartment complexes that you're into $100 million, we're going to give you $30 million today. Now that's a huge haircut. But we're picking up properties at pennies on the dollar. We ended up with a 48% IRR return in 2009, 2010, when the rest of the market was losing 30 and 50%, because we had dry powder, because we positioned ourselves right when everything came crashing out. People say that, what's going to happen when the market, when the tide goes out, who's swimming naked.
That's what Warren says. Right?
And you make money when there's blood in the streets. And so we weren't making money from the blood in the streets. I like to say that we made money from creating the first aid kits to help people when there was blood in the streets. And that's really where we created a true win-win-win, a win for the employees, a win for our investors, a win for the banks. They created that liquidity they needed, a win for the tenants because we knew how to manage those properties way better than the banks did.
Did the mandates dry up in 2009? In other words, did the allocations slow down to a trickle?
The allocations from the FDA.
The investors,
No. Well, it was hard. I will say this: everybody was sitting on their wallets, but everybody was scared to death. They needed to put their money somewhere, and they were losing here. We were the only place that they didn't. Now we only paid like a 9% return in 2009. But everybody else was losing 30 and 50%. So it made it. It was still arm to arm. We're working hard to get that money in. It was hard, but because we were positioned right and we had the right strategy, that's what allowed us to just bring in hundreds of millions of dollars when everybody else was losing their shirts.
Super interesting. Let's move to what caused you to start being interested? And I don't remember exactly what you told me, but I think you were tapped by some by the feds to do some undercover work. Like, talk to us. So let's leave that subject matter behind. Let's move on to, okay, what caused you to have an interest in trafficking and thwarting that and so on?
Well, then I'll touch on this. Early on, when John and I were trying to raise money, I had no idea how to get in the same room with wealthy people. I didn't know. I was like, because I couldn't put an advertisement out. I had to literally figure out how to. I knew I could create relationships with them to have them invest, but I didn't know how to get in the same room. So I wrote this list, where do rich people hang out? And one of them was charity. I realized that a lot of these uber wealthy families they were sponsoring these charity events. And so if I could pay $200 and get a seat at the Alzheimer's charity thing or the, whatever it was. So
Smart. Yeah.
I had raised millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from relationships that I got from doing charity work. So it wasn't all just out of philanthropy.
Not altruism. No, it was business.
Exactly.
Totally. It's
but,
normal.
But at the same time, I really fell in love with the process of making a difference in the lives of others. I was on the Make-A-Wish board for 7 years. I was the incoming chairman for Make-A-Wish at the time that I got a phone call from our attorney general. He knew that I was very philanthropic, ulterior motives, but I still was, right? He knew that I had connections with a lot of wealthy donors, potential donors. And he called me up and he said, Paul, I need to talk to you about something that's pretty dark. He said, I know that you're very involved in child-related charities. And he said, this is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. And good people don't know that it's happening. And he said, I'm talking about human trafficking. He said, in particular, in this case, child trafficking. And it was completely foreign to me. I could not imagine that somebody would pay for sex with a child or the organ harvesting, all these horrific things that he was talking about. And then he introduced me to a Homeland Security agent that had identified some children in Cartagena, Colombia that were being trafficked. That was the beginning. And so I helped to fund that mission. They needed like $50,000 to help rescue those kids. And 2 weeks later, I get a call from the agent. And he said, Paul, I'm in Cartagena. And there's not just 20 children here. There's more than 50 in this one ring alone. And there's more than 100 children in the surrounding cities that are all tied in. He said, we have a plan. We could rescue all 100 plus children on the same day, but I need your help. And my ego self was like, well, how much do you need?
Yeah, right.
Write you a check. And he said, I need you. Could you be in Colombia in 2 days? He said, I have to have somebody who can effectively negotiate a multi-million-dollar real estate deal with the cartel, with the
convincingly.
Yeah. Convincingly. He says, I can't teach my Navy SEALs how to do it. He says, these guys will see through fake money all day long. He said, I need you to come dressed as a wealthy playboy. And I was in Atlanta, Georgia. I was at a conference raising money for the fund. Third and fourth generation billionaire families there. And I'm on the phone with him and I said, how do I dress? He goes, like a wealthy playboy. I look down, I've got $2,000 cufflinks on. Right. I've got a suit that costs more than my
kind of
first
fits.
car.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. And so I've got a Breitling watch that's, one of the high end ones, almost $50,000. I'm like, you know what? I think I got the outfit. And so
how did you though? I know you're skillful in your background, especially in negotiating in the business world and to dress the part. But the emotional and mental part, how did you get yourself into that character to like, now you're going to be doing business with, this is not
the bad
right,
guys.
The bad guys. That's a different story. To look the part is one thing, but to really be convincing, because they can feel whether you're fake or genuine.
Absolutely. Well, and what's interesting about that, a year earlier, I was with the Attorney General. I called him up and I said, "What's up, AG?" I says, I got front row tickets to the Miss America pageant. You want to go?" And his exact words to me were, "Hutch, unlike you, I have a reputation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
He said, I can't be front row of Miss America.
Yeah.
I says, no, it's not like that. I said, I'm sponsoring some children that lost their fathers in military battle, some little girls, and we're paying for their flights and their hair and their dresses and whatever. It's a cool charity event. And so he says, yeah, I'll go with you. So because it was a fallen soldier event, the Pentagon had sent a representative, this guy by the name of John. John was he was a CIA recruiter for 25 years. So after 4 days at this event, we're at dinner. I've got Miss Americas, on either side of me, me, that's the old me,
Yeah.
and I've got the Attorney General, and he's sitting across from me, this John, and John says, Mr. Hutchinson, I've been watching you for the last 4 days, and I think your country could use your talent.
Oh boy.
I'm like, well, what talents are those? He said, you're about 1 in 12 million of what we call the perfect chameleon. He said, I saw you in seconds break down the barrier of communication and become best friends with a billionaire, a bum on the street, or a runway model. He said, your ability to just say the right words at the right time, he says, is very unique. He said, imagine this. We fly you to Dubai. We line you up with some dirty money guys. You have the perfect backstory because you're running the $1 billion fund. He said, you find out all the information that we need. He says, I'll line you up with some real billionaire guys to make it worth your time and whatever. I ended up his guys called me about 2 months later. I ended up turning him down. I didn't want to put my life in danger for some white collar crime guys.
And your family.
And my family,
Yeah.
exactly, all that. Fast forward a year later, the reason why the Homeland Security agent called me is that he was in a meeting. I wasn't there, but I was told about it. He was in a meeting with the Attorney General and a guy by the name of Josh Romney. His dad ran for president years ago. They were sitting in this meeting, and the agent said, I need to find somebody who can play this role, who can effectively be able to, play different roles, but has had some training, so he's not going to get killed, but also knows how to negotiate a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. And Sean, the Attorney General, he goes, well, have you ever met Paul Hutchinson? And Josh, Romney, he says, oh, Paul would be perfect. And I told him later, I said, I don't think that's a compliment.
Yeah.
You guys both think that I would be a good undercover pedophile, right? But that was one of the reasons they brought me in. But Mary, to your question, there's nothing you can do to prepare for that. I had no idea how difficult it would be to. I was fine, talking smack, top guys, sexy this and whatever else, the female trafficker, I, kiss her on the cheek and slap her ass, the kind of thing that a rich.
So you'd fit in. Yeah.
I'd fit in, right? But when they started talking
about the weird shit,
the children, I started getting just sick to my stomach, right? That was super hard. And the hardest thing for me was halfway through that first conversation, one of the traffickers leans forward and he was so excited I was willing to look at their project, right? Because the reason they needed me down there is he had a piece of property he wanted to develop into a child brothel sex resort. He needed a few $1 million to build it out. He believed it could be a Jeffrey Epstein type island and he could make tens of millions of dollars a year selling children to wealthy Americans. And so I was there to convince him I was willing to fund his project. And halfway through, he leans forward and he goes, Pablo, I have a gift for you. I said, really? What's your gift? He hands me his phone and there's a picture of an 11-year-old girl on his phone. He said, this is Princess. That wasn't her real name, but that's what he called her, right? He says, this is Princess.
And a sunken feeling.
She's 11. She's still a virgin. And then he started talking about horrific things I could do to this little child. He says, we just took delivery of some virgins. And I thought to myself, if we could get these children out before they were ever raped in the first place, that would be a miracle. And something he said made me realize he had more than her. I said, Fuego, I said, you just took delivery. You have more virgins? He goes, oh yeah, I got 3 or 4 more. I said, you're bringing those to my party as well. Because I told him, look, I'll fund your project under one condition. We're going to have a big party. You're going to bring all of your inventory to one place, all of them for this party. And if I'm happy with everything that you currently have, then I'll fund your project. So I said, you're bringing those ones to the party too. He goes, oh, no. He said, they're too expensive. I said, too expensive? He goes, yeah. He says, I was already paying this guy $25,000. I'm paying him $500 per child just for a minimum of 50 children for 2 hours in the afternoon, right? And he goes, oh, no. He says, He says, those ones are too expensive. He says, you already paid $25,000. You want to F these other virgins. It's going to cost you maybe $2,000, maybe $5,000 for that little one. It's going to cost you $10,000 more. Now, at this point, there was no acting involved. I was legitimately pissed, right? He's talking about these children like they're commodities. And I'm in my nice suit, my nice shirt. I got a watch on that costs more than all of his cars combined, right? And I put my hands on my chest and I say, you don't think I can afford an extra $10,000? He's like, oh, no, Jefe, no. I said, I want every one of those virgins at my party. I said, they damn well better be virgins when they get there. They're not for you. They're for me. You understand? Otherwise, the deal's off. He goes, oh, yeah, Jefe, I understand. So in the movie, Sound of Freedom, my character was the wealthy guy who funded it. And I said, no, I don't want to go. And the only way that I was convinced is he gave this picture of this 11-year-old girl to my driver. In real life, I was already there. I was face to face with these evil people, but showing me her picture is what catalyzed my commitment to eradicate that, to help rescue that child.
So at that point, were you surprised that there was that much evil in the world that faced you right in the face?
I had no idea it was that dark. You know, I've seen, you know, my charity work before. I had seen children dying of cancer and families being torn apart. I saw, you know, kids in Africa with flies on their faces. I saw even people who had, you know, domestic abuse and physical abuse and yelling at kids. And, you know, I saw the aftermath of some of those when I worked at Primary Children's Hospital. That was sad. That was disturbing. But I had no idea the depravity of humanity when it got to that point. And what was interesting, Arthur, is the very first time that I met a trafficker, I thought my image of a trafficker, tattoos on their neck, big earrings in their noses, right? That's what I thought, you know, a thug on the street. The first trafficker I met was a businessman in a white polo shirt, clean shaven. The next one was a beautiful woman running a fake modeling agency. And
the one that's depicted in the movie,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
She was a model, right?
She was a model.
Yeah.
She was like running from Miss Cartagena at one time and, you know, working with some modeling agency. Now, she was not the kingpin like what you see in the movie. It was actually the guy that owned the property that was, you know, but she was there and had access to their kids and whatnot. But I asked myself, are these really traffickers? You know, this doesn't seem like a trafficker. But when we sat down and started discussing their evil plans, over the last 10 years, I've led or played a key part in over 70 undercover missions. And every single time, the traffickers, the common thread was arrogance and greed and lust. And it was out of control every single time.
I'm not sure how many you've done undercover, the missions, but at any point, was there the slightest percentage that you yourself felt like, oh shit, I'm going to get caught, that I'm not authentic in this, or two, that they started to hint that something was not?
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah, there have been a number of cases where, you know, they're like, you a cop, you know, whatever, and I'd get back in their faces, are you a cop, you know, and there were that very first mission, the hardest time for me that I almost blew the cover was when they had brought the children. And one of the traffickers stands up and he said, Pablo, I have to show you the gifts that I brought you. And he had brought those virgins like I told him to. And he went in the house, and within minutes of going in the house, you could hear a few of the children crying. They were so scared. And that was so difficult to sit there, to not do anything about it. Right?
You have kids.
Yeah,
I mean, even if you don't have kids, but having kids, it amplifies how horrific that is, right?
Try not to blow your cover, right?
Exactly.
It's the biggest thing. You're resistant.
Everything in me wanted to get up and go figure out what's going on with the kids. And then even worse than that, a few minutes later, he came back out and he had 4 virgins. And they were scared. These kids were scared. There was an 11-year-old boy that they gave cocaine that morning because he was scared it was going to hurt. What kind of fucked up monster thinks that that's attractive, right? And then this little girl, the same one in the picture, they stood her in front of me. And I'm sitting on a chair and she's standing up and we're eye level. just like this. And all I could see was fear in her eyes. And that was really difficult to not say, you're going to be fine. You're going to see your parents. I couldn't say that. I took her hands. I said, ¿Cómo te llamas? What's your name? She didn't say her name. I said, está bien. It's okay. And I told the traffickers it was so difficult to not blow the cover right there. I said, look, we're not ready for the party yet. We need to negotiate our business deal first. Send it back in, because that was so hard.
Wow.
Was it just you or others? How many were
Yeah,
there?
we had a bunch of operators. We had guys in the swimming pool were Navy SEALs, right?
Gotcha.
I had behind me La Sombra was actually the Attorney General, the incoming one. We had we had some undercover CTI agents, some former Homeland Security guys that were there. But I was sitting at the head of the table in the negotiation. I was the one that they were trying to impress. So they brought the children in specifically for me.
Did you feel, aside from obviously being at risk of your cover being blown, was there a rescue in the offing for you? Like if things got off the rails?
Well, we had backing besides backing. So first of all, the Colombian CTI, the Colombian federal agents, they had some undercover agents.
And they were on your side.
They were on
They
our
weren't
side.
totally corrupt.
Exactly. The local cops, half the time, every operation, they're corrupt in some way.
Were you playing like double agent?
Yeah, sometimes there's been operations. Some of the most dangerous ones were ones where we ran into dirty cops, right? Yeah. That were working with the traffickers. So we had to be super careful. Not the local cops. No, half the time those guys are connected with the traffickers in some way. So these were federal agents flown in from Bogota into Cartagena, and we had our maids, our waiters, our cooks were undercover federal agents. Now they weren't very good cooks.
Right.
They actually almost blew our cover, because I talk about this in the book as well, where the waiters came out with a block of cheese for us. I'm talking a block. No knife to cut it with, no crackers or anything else, literally just a block of cheese.
That's
I'm like,
cheesecake for you, right?
Holy shit, I thought this was going to be fun.
That's heavy. That's heavy shit.
Yeah. The fun part is the rescue. I mean, the most beautiful moment of my life was after the agents came, stormed the party, arrested everybody. Child Protective Services came in with the children, and they started laughing and playing with them and singing with them. And that sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard. Yeah. And I told that story 100 times, if it wasn't 1,000 times, over the next 3 or 4 years before we even named the movie, is that sound of freedom was the most beautiful sound that I ever heard. And they weren't supposed to tell the children that we were the good guys, but I think somebody must have said something, or that little girl that was standing in front of me, she must have felt something, because as we were being let off the island, she was standing there by the window. Her hand was on the window. It was like a screen door type thing. She was crying again, but she was smiling and waving at us. And she said in her broken English, she said, "Thank you, Americans." And that's when I broke down. I started crying, and I turned to the guys. I says, "Holy shit!" I said, "I've spent my whole life making money, making rich people richer." I says, "I want to make a difference. What do you need? How can I help?" And at that point, they said, there's a large percentage of the demand for stuff like this that comes from Jeffrey Epstein type people, guys that are wealthy. He says, "I can't teach my Navy SEALs how to wear a $50,000 watch and negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. These guys see through fake money all day long." Yeah. He said, "And I don't know of any ultra successful business owners who's had the training that you've had." He said, "If you're willing to be the bait, I'll change your whole life."
So how many in total operations undercover have you done, and what year did you stop and started to think about making the movie?
I've led or played a key part in over 70 undercover missions. Now, when I say 70, it's important to understand that like our Puerto Vallarta mission, that we rescued 48 children on that one, every time that I went in undercover, because it was a period of like 4 months. And so, I'd go in, build relationships with one trafficker, and then go in another one, the week later or 2 weeks later, et cetera. So each individual time that we went in undercover, I counted that as those 70, right? Yep. And I didn't think that I would ever go public. In fact, even when we made the movie, me, Dave Lopez, Andrew, Jimmy, Jeremy, all of these other operators, we didn't want our faces out there.
Right.
The Homeland Security agent, he wanted to be the face of child trafficking. He's the one that, Jim Caviezel.
Rear move, yeah.
Yeah. He wanted to be that. And that was right at the end of the Columbia mission. You can't do deep undercover work if your face is on CNN, ABC, and everything else. So he wanted to be the face of child trafficking. And we were okay with that. We would do the rescues. We would do the undercover work. We would find the kids. He would show up with cameras. He would tell the story. Our faces would be blurred, which was fine because we didn't need to be known. So when we filmed the movie, even the script, we took about 8 different rescue missions, about 20 different operators, put them all together with just a handful of actors. Right? The jungle rescue, that wasn't in Colombia. It was in Haiti. It wasn't looking after a little girl. It was a little boy. He was young. He was kidnapped in front of a church house, and it was an entirely different team. It wasn't, the Homeland Security agent that went in with that team there. So there was a lot of different things that were all the stories were true, but they were a lot of different stories. Like, he wasn't the one that was there when the little boy came across the border. And the little boy coming across the border, he wasn't really the brother of the little girl that they called Princess, but we meshed them all into one storyline to help the audience feel what we had felt.
Absolutely.
But then to your question of coming out, I never thought that I would have interviews like this ever. I was perfectly happy doing the undercover work. I did speak. You guys heard me speak a number of years ago, but they were very closed groups. Nothing public. We had no cameras ever at those. And it was because there was a very, very large influencer that saw one of my operations. And he said to me, Paul, the world needs to hear your stories, but the world can't know who you are while you're doing undercover. He said, I suggest that you only speak to change makers, influencers, family offices where we have, royalty and world leaders and successful business owners and stuff. So for a number of years, I spoke exclusively at family office conferences in which we would have them closed down.
Door, yeah.
Yeah, closed door, no cameras or anything else. So that's why you guys heard the story way before the world did. But then early last year, the movie still had no distribution. I thought that was a complete waste of my money, because nobody was distributing the film. We couldn't get it out anywhere. And at that point, I had a lot of pressure from family and other people that I should go public. And I said, I never want to be that guy. I don't want to have the plight of these children bringing people to paulhutchinson.com, right? I don't want to do that. And they said, no, that's exactly why you need to. And you need to be the voice going out there, because the movie was not going anywhere. So I did.
So it's binary. You're either going to be undercover or you're not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what? I'm done being undercover. I'm gonna go public. My first podcast got shared almost 100,000 times.
Amazing.
And less than 2 months later, Angel Studios picked up the contract and did distribution on the film, and it became the #1 independent film in the world last year.
When you extracted yourself, again, you had to make that decision. Did others in the agency, or did they still continue? Are they still doing as we're speaking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the operators that I served with are still doing the work. In fact, I had a Navy SEAL that flew in just yesterday. I spent some time with him that up in Park City right before I came to your place that I had done a bunch of work with. And his organization is still taking down pedophile rings, training police departments, and we're helping to fund a lot of those. I'm not doing undercover anymore, but we help to fund them. And a big part of what we're creating is the healing side, the safe houses for the kids, changing laws and policies. Because of the fact that I've been on the ground in so many countries, I know what's working and what's not working in those countries to help keep the kids safe.
So let's talk about that. I want to go, not forget to go and talk about what people heard about Hollywood's pushback on getting the movie done. But first, let's talk about the consensus is that the solution to the problem isn't to arrest the perpetrators, the pedophiles, because they'll always be there, is arguably find a better way for the people who are making so much money on what arguably is a recurring revenue asset. Is there a solution to stop this, or at least make it really, really difficult? and not as profitable? Because it seems to me, and you tell me, I'm just parroting what I've heard as a potential solution or position is, if you stop it from being so profitable, that even if it's culturally accepted in those countries, they'll figure out something. They'll figure out other ways to make more money.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, I battled with this for over 10 years because the thing that I wished more than anything, every time I went undercover and rescued these kids, the thing that I wanted more than anything is to make it so those kids didn't have to go through that pain in the first place, right? What if I could go back a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it was, before they were ever trafficked, before that trafficker ever went down that road? And what if I had a conversation with that trafficker and said, what is going on in your life that makes you think that in any way this
is okay?
That's okay. Now, again, the audience is so important. Don't get me wrong on this. I am not a sympathizer of anybody who hurts children. I've literally put my life in danger hundreds of times on these operations to guarantee that they never hurt innocents again. But in order to really fix this problem, we need to take a step back as humanity and say, where's it coming from? Why in the world is somebody paying money to rape a 12-year-old? Why is that even a thing anywhere? Yeah. Where is that energy coming from?
Where does it stem from? Yeah.
Exactly. And I realized this, that 1 out of every 4 women that you know was a victim of sexual abuse and sexual violence as a child. 1 out of every 4. It's a huge number. Almost half of all women at some time in their life, but a fourth of them as a child, right? For men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in every 5, 20% at some time in our life. But even them, the majority of them was as a child, and 1/4 of them was under the age of 10 years old in their own homes. Now, why do I bring that into the picture? Okay? God bless them. 2/3, the majority of people who were abused as children, 2/3 of them grow up to be protectors, right? There's no way that a child will ever be hurt on my watch because I don't want them to ever go through the pain that I went through, right? That's 2/3 of them. However, 1 out of every 3, especially men, 1 out of every 3 who dealt with that kind of trauma as a child, if not given the love, the help, the healing, the tools that they need, 1 out of every 3 becomes a contact offender. And
is that higher in those parts of the world where trafficking is more prevalent?
It's
probably, right?
Yeah, it is. But here's what happens. Being a contact offender is not just trafficking a child. It's abusing kids in their own neighborhood. Yeah. You walk out in your
bullying or whatever.
Yeah, and it could come out in physical abuse, verbal abuse, or in some cases the sexual abuse of a child. Now, again, God bless them, the ones who never allow that. So it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. Oh, yeah, you were abused as a child, so now it's okay. No, nothing's okay. It's never okay to hurt a child. But what it does is it helps us as humanity say, okay, if that's the case, if all these traffickers that we arrested, almost every one of them started out with either abuse as a child themselves and an insatiable addiction to something like pornography. Now, everybody listening to me has seen pornography. It doesn't mean you're going to become a pedophile. However, for a lot of people, it operates like a drug, right? If you don't have a healthy relationship and you're addicted to pornography, what happens is you need something harder to have that same fix because it's really not fulfilling. Now, I'm not talking about, together with your spouse, that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about when you're quiet in your own office and you're trying, and you're objectifying. And what happens is for some of them, they want something harder to have that same fix. And harder for some is a little bit, grotesque or rape videos, or for some of them, harder is a little bit younger. Pretty soon they're fantasizing about things they wouldn't have even thought was attractive 5 years ago. And then they're acting out on these horrific fantasies. So we need to figure out how to heal addictions. We need to heal the PTSD of childhood trauma. We need to heal anxiety and depression because sometimes that's a contributing factor of passing that trauma on. And so liberating humanity, I still have the Child Liberation Foundation, which is building safe houses and programs to help keep kids safe and heal, etc. But liberating humanity is focused on eradicating trafficking by healing humanity from their childhood trauma, from their addictions, from their PTSD, from all of these things that are contributing to eventually the harming of a child.
I think we need to zoom out a little bit, because there's also another, my opinion, a misconception of human trafficking, child trafficking. And as the movie is great, I'm not saying anything negative, but there's almost a misconception that this happens very often, that the concept is either kidnapping or selling them off and they never see it. It happens in the United States. It happens more likely than families are grooming their children. Maybe if you can touch up on that, just even speaking,
Absolutely.
I guess going to the basics of what defines in the categories of child trafficking, just human trafficking, because it's more than just the kidnapping.
And you're so right. You know, that the big misconception, especially people going to see the movie, is that that's what trafficking is. It's a third world country thing. And, a healthy family has a child that is taken, putting in a container. Yes, that happens. It's very, very, very seldom. Right? People will leave Sound of Freedom and they will say, I want to do something. I want to help. Well, the worst thing you can do is go to Colombia and try to rescue children. You're going to get shot, right? And you're probably going to get arrested at the same time. The best thing you can do is go home and hug your children. And people are like, how does that help? What does it matter? Well, the majority of children that are moved to another place actually come from broken homes, runaways, or a foster care program, right? However, the bigger problem, and this is where most parents don't even understand, right? The bigger problem is the fact that most children who are sold for sex sleep in their own beds at night, right? Now, parents are like, what? Are you kidding me? Well, here's what happens. You need a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, I don't like it when you tell me to hug Uncle Harry, because he touches me weird and he tells me that we should have secrets away from you. Or I don't like going to this friend's house because her brother's taking pictures of us when we're changing, and he tells us that we talk sexual things to me or whatever. Or this babysitter showing us pornography and says that that we should trust her more than you. These are grooming behaviors. And unfortunately, there's even a high percentage of children who are abused by their own fathers, who are sold by their own mothers. It happens all the time. Absolutely. It happens all the time. And we think, you walk out in your front yard in any healthy neighborhood throughout the United States, and you look left and you look right, there's actually a very high chance that one of those houses on your street is a dangerous place for children. Okay, so yes, there's 10 million children that are being sold for sex and organ harvesting and labor camps and whatnot. But there is over 1 billion women who have been abused as a child in their own homes. This is the real epidemic. And this is what nobody ever talks about. It's this generational abuse of hurt people hurting other people, right? There's the cases of, a man who at 8 years old and his uncle, raped him and whatnot, and he doesn't ever want to talk about it because he thinks it's going to make him less of a man. No, it won't. You were 8. That was a horrible thing that happened with somebody passing on that trauma. And if you hold it inside, the average age of somebody talking about that trauma as a child, the average age is 52 years old. That's my age. Right? I've raised my kids. I've built my career. And if you're holding on to that pain, now, hopefully it's not coming out in the abuse of a child, but it for sure is coming out in low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, anger issues. These are all things
like Ray Donovan.
Yeah.
That is a very comprehensive, how do we solve the problem, right? Get to the people, hopefully first get to the people, children, but in the homes where they're not being loved and they're potential victims to being abused. And then if they are, figure out how to get that healed. And Mary's done a lot of work with healing the family line. Can you talk a little bit about hereditary and how?
Definitely want to say probably 2020. I feel like COVID for a lot of people catalyzed a lot of this spiritual awakening, a lot of this this healing, and definitely 2020, 2021. I've done the inner work and super grateful for Paul. We've known each other since 2018. So when you're saying 2017, I'm trying to do the timeline of when this all started. And we were so fortunate because you invited us to the Ellis Island, the Honors Award. And then again, we haven't spoken to each other. And then 2020 during COVID, we just so happened to fall here at of all places. Utah never came out of my mouth to
It's the
ever.
state.
I'm a New York girl from Brooklyn. I'm a Brooklyn girl. Never in my life the Utah came out of my mouth to come here. And sure enough, we forgot that you were here in 2021. Sharing my story with you, and you help catalyze and facilitate this beautiful journey healing, which I want to actually talk more about how your operation now has expanded. So right now you put that aside, the undercover missions, had the movie, wrote the book. What's your vision? And right now you're starting, I believe in South America, if I can disclose that, you're starting your healing facilities. Is this something you're looking to branch to the United States? Just given the statistics, it's so sad, but United States, we're the supply and the demand. So is there something, whether it's an awareness in the government or agencies to have healing facilities here? Is that something?
Absolutely. And you've been with us for a number of years and seen our work in that space. In fact, I honor you for helping other women who have been through some serious trauma in their childhood.
And helping me.
Yeah.
Let's be clear.
We all need But what happened, and I'll just touch on this. This is going to be an eye opener for a lot of listeners, but I'm just going to put it this way. I am in my early 20s. My first successful company was the Attacking Anxiety and Depression Company. We touched on that earlier, and we had a cognitive restructuring program to help people change without using medication, figure out how to overcome anxiety, depression, and PTSD and addictions, etc. Those were what and that's my first successful company. It was a workbook and audio programs, and it took about 12 weeks with a personal coach, 1 to 2 hours a day of work for people to really break free of a lot of this. And even then, if depending on their trauma, it was 10 and 20 years worth of therapy to really work through it. Well, about 8+ years ago, a couple of my undercover operators called me up, Jimmy and Andy, and they said, "Hey, Paul, do you trust us?" I said, "I trust you 100%. I literally I put my life in danger in your hands." And they said, "You need to come to this healing retreat." I'm like, "I'm not going to heal. Heal what? I'm Paul F. and Hutchinson. Right? I don't need to heal anything." And they said, "No, you're on your second marriage. It's heading for a divorce. You're disastrous in so many areas of your life. And I think this would be something that would be truly transformational." And I said, "Well, tell me more about it." They said, "Well, there's this doctor who's traveled around the world and identified different types of holistic healing. And she uses a tool that was thrown under the bus in the late 60s. Okay, President Nixon decided in the late 60s he was going to classify a whole bunch of things as Schedule I drugs. We're talking about things like sassafras, white lily, mistletoe, psilocybin, different types of psychedelics, right? So we've been taught, I'm 53 years old, since that time, for the last 50+ years, I've been taught that these things are as dangerous as cocaine. Why? Because they're classified in the same categorization as cocaine. So I thought they were super dangerous. Well, the truth is psilocybin is safer than table sugar, right? There's never been a case of addiction. There's never been a case of overdose. And
they've been lying to us about sugar from the very beginning.
Exactly.
We're talking about like conspiracy, right? I feel like Joe Rogan, like MK Ultra, right? They use the psilocybin as a methodology for the brainwashing, kind of manipulating, getting their agenda forward type thing.
Exactly.
So it was
they
used.
Knew that if Americans had access to these things, that they would say to the, the draft and the war, they're like, no, I'm connected with humanity. I don't want to be shooting people. And you can't, it would be super difficult to be blowing somebody's head off if you've gone through a psilocybin journey experience,
Absolutely.
right? And the agenda of a lot of, Hollywood and others is to separate people from their moral foundations and from God. And Johns Hopkins University did a study using psilocybin with 800 plus atheists, self-proclaimed atheists, and 2/3 of them, after one session with psilocybin, 2/3 of them changed their saying, I'm no longer an atheist. I believe in God because
Some divinity, anyway.
yeah, exactly, whatever it is. Well, beyond that, we realized that these tools. Now, I'm not a fan whatsoever of somebody going to a rave party and getting high on mushrooms. That's
It's a different intention. They're not doing it for that.
Exactly.
And I think that's a key word, intention with it.
Exactly.
Doing,
But used with a trained facilitator in an atmosphere, in a container where you have people like you've come in and helped to train and facilitate with some of these ladies who had dealt with some of that trauma. When you're in that container with other people who have the right heart and facilitators that understand how to work through trauma, you can get 10 and 20 years worth of therapy done in 24 to 48 hours. So
Absolutely.
yes, we were working hard to change the laws in the US. Since I've gone public, I'm now a target, especially with me talking very boldly about 3-letter agencies that are involved with trafficking, et cetera. I can't be a target in the US and be running these things until they're fully approved by the FDA, right? So places like Colorado and Oregon have decriminalized it, but we've taken it to a whole new level. And in South America, we have 4-day, fully immersive, transformational experiences, not only to heal from childhood trauma, anxiety, depression, PTSD, addictions, but also people like myself that had unmitigated egos that needed to learn how to lead from a place of the heart and have healthy relationships. That all of those things are incorporated in that space.
Professionally facilitated and legally done.
Exactly. That's what's important.
Yeah.
And even these states that are decriminalized is still illegal on the federal level. So this is why we moved to Latin America, but it's super effective, incredibly transformational for the people that come.
Yeah, many of the listeners have seen the movie, no doubt. Let's talk about a little bit, to the extent you can, and it's important, the pushback from Hollywood and why.
Yeah. Here's the thing. We as Americans need to be hypersensitive about what's being force-fed to us. This mass psychosis, so to speak, in the media, big media, social media, everything. We're literally being led down this primrose path to believe what they want us to believe and to separate ourselves from the things that are some of our foundational moral principles. So let me tell you this story, and it'll bring it all into focus. So Angel Studios, the studio that finally did distribution of Sound of Freedom movie, years ago, their predecessor that ended up, becoming Angel Studios got sued by Big Hollywood. Why? They got sued because they had created a piece of hardware and software. It was kind of a DVD player, right? But this was a special DVD player that you could put a DVD in of a rated R movie that had, vulgarity and sex and, murders and whatever else in it. And you could adjust it. You could say, you know what, I want to take the vulgarity down from a 10 to a 5. I want to take the sex down from a 10 to a 9 or 2, depending on if they're kids, whatever it is. And you could literally take a rated R movie and make it PG, PG-13, make it G, whatever it was. You could make the decision as a parent to filter what you wanted to have coming into your home. And you could watch these movies with your kids.
On a movie by movie basis.
They had people going through that would mark the sections of each movie. This is a nudity section, this is vulgarity, and they would mark them all.
Yeah.
And then all you had to do is just change the format on it, and boom, it would take that movie and you would watch it as a movie, as a rated PG movie or whatever it was. It was beautiful. Right?
And they're the only ones, sorry,
They were the only, They did it, but they got sued by Hollywood for giving you the power to decide what you wanted coming into your home. They got sued by Hollywood because they were giving you that power. This tells you the whole story right there.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Totally.
That one instance tells you what's going on.
Yeah.
And so
we're going to tell you what it's going to be, and you're going to listen to it, and you're going to like it. It's just like going to the dentist.
And just like the state telling the parents you don't have consent over your kid to chop off their parts. It's really disturbing.
agenda that we need to be aware of in our government, with our doctors, with big media, with social media, with Hollywood, all of them. And so we need to take a step back and say, okay, really what's going on here? And they didn't want us to have these conversations. That's really what's going on. Why? Because there's these networks of pedophilia that is rampant in Hollywood and is rampant with big government and is rampant in big media. It is everywhere. And because of that, they didn't want us having these conversations because it would put at risk the things that are the really
The machine.
dark
Oh, absolutely.
So do you think that, back to our discussion about the reasons why pedophilia is happening and people need to go harder and harder just to satiate their lust or whatever it is, do you think that these people have been tricked into thinking that that is the ultimate pleasure, to have a 15-year-old? Or is it just like everything else in California and Hollywood? It just became a trend and everybody fell into it because everybody else was doing it.
Are you talking about the act? Like, sorry, so
No,
I
I'm
understand.
talking
Like,
about pedophilia. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, see, here's two parts of it. There's the guy who's addicted to pornography and and now he's looking at child pornography, and then he goes to Colombia and rapes a child and whatnot. There's that side of it. The other side of it is tied to literal satanic rituals and blackmail and control, right? If you think that Jeffrey Epstein was just a sick old dude that was doing his own thing, I've got a bridge to sell you in London, right?
Yeah.
That the operation was orchestrated by the guys who are really in control. I'm telling you that straight out. If you are an agency that wants to control the vote of a senator, of a congressman, of a federal judge, if you want to control their votes forever, get them on some drugs, get them to let down their guard, get them on film with an 11-year-old. You control that vote forever.
and
right?
Epstein was their tool to get leverage
Absolutely.
on those people, and he agreed to do it because he just got rich along the way.
Absolutely.
And he probably, he had no moral compass, but besides,
absolutely.
yeah.
And that happens in politics. You can tell when you have a politician that you're super close with and you help him get into office, and then a year later, all of a sudden, boom, they're changed. It's because they're compromised. It may not have been with a child type thing. It may have been them now on video with their personal assistant.
It's leverage now.
But leverage is the name of the game in politics. And if they can get that degree of dirt, they control you forever. Now, in the Hollywood world, there's some pretty dark things in terms of, literally, we joke about you sell your soul to the devil for massive success. Well, that happens more than you think, right? There are people that will, if you cross this line and this line, we will guarantee that you end up popular and wealthy and successful, et cetera, in that arena. And it's pervasive within the Hollywood arena. It happens all the time. And they want to make sure that we're not having these conversations so that we don't really look into what's going on.
A man like me can't look ridiculous.
Exactly.
Remember the Godfather?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's wild.
So it's true. I've seen it. I've worked with operators who have seen some of the tunnels. I've interviewed people that have been sold to the top levels of different agencies, et cetera, when they were children. That are very verifiable.
So going backwards, right, when you got called for this as a position to do for the undercover, as this is happening, because correct me, this is Homeland, right? What agency was it?
It actually wasn't. These were former agency people. This wasn't sanctioned by the U.S. government. So Tim was former Homeland Security.
Okay.
But had he couldn't do the operation working with Homeland Security. The story that I was
Plausible deniability.
exactly. Well, and what frustrated him was the fact that he needed $50,000 to help rescue these kids. They turned him down, but that same week they gave $50,000 to another operator who was doing a fake Hewlett Packard's manufacturing sting in China, right? But they wouldn't do the $50,000 here to rescue these kids, right? And so that's he had to leave that. In fact, all of our Navy SEALs, Green Berets, all these guys were former operators.
Okay, that makes sense. So,
And what would happen too is before working with the government, they would kind of butt heads. They would go to Columbia, hey, no, we need help. No, we can handle this. Now as a private organization, we can go in with the Child Liberation Foundation. We can go in and say, hey, we will fund everything. We will do all the work. We will give you all the credit, and we will work under your laws. All we ask, and this is to the federal agencies in Ecuador and Honduras and all these different places.
so that makes sense. There were former agents. So during that time, was there pushback from people who are active agents at the time? Like, or they're trying to stop or ruin your undercover missions by any chance?
We did. We had, there's a lot of good people in the agencies. And unfortunately, I think there were some bad apples in that first foundation that we worked with. Some of the guys that were the former Homeland Security agent, a lot of the guys in the agency don't like him at all because he was full of crap on a lot of things. But, a lot of the good Navy SEALs and Green Berets I worked with, they still have great credibility in the active ones. But we had one situation where we were contacted by the FBI guys in Hawaii that were concerned about a lot of the child trafficking. They had seen what we had done on different operations. They wanted us to come in and do some operation there because they didn't know who was involved. There was so much, nepotism type stuff, and they didn't know if these police officers, their cousin was actually involved in trafficking. So they wanted to have groups that were completely unassociated, that were good at this undercover, to really find out where the trafficking was coming from in Hawaii. So we were all set up, ready to go. And right before the operation, we got a boom, stop from the FBI federal in Washington, D.C. said, no, we will not have a private foundation doing, the work that we should be doing. Well, they weren't doing it, right? And so, there are some, this is why we haven't done a lot in the U.S. other than now we have a lot of our other foundations that are training police departments on what to look for and what to do. But most of my operations were outside the country.
Yeah. So let's talk about the content of the book, the motivation to do it. When's it coming out?
Well, I was writing some other books that will be coming out soon, and when the movie did so well, I was told by our publishers, look, you need to share those stories, the real ones, not the fictional, we're going to put this together, whatever else, but the actual real stories of what happened on those missions. And my first version of it was thinner. It was like less than 100 pages because I was just doing the Cartagena, Colombia mission. And then and a little bit of some, jungle type stuff and whatever. But they said, you need to expand it. You need, in order to be a hardback, you need at least 200 pages. So I'm like, okay, I've got to go back in. And so what I did, I think is so much better for the reader. The first section is, I'm titling it the making of an undercover operator. But really it talks about learning situational awareness, learning tactical training, learning all of these different things. So parents can literally take this, and that first part of it can be learning things that are going to help them keep their kids safe, because they were the things that we needed to learn to go into that space of doing undercover work. And then I go through some of the rescue missions, but go into detail and bring you there. I can't take people physically to be in that dangerous place, but I can help you feel what we had felt. And it's not dark. This is why we have Running into the Light. There's such a beautiful story with the rescue and rehabilitation of the children and getting back to their families, etc. And then the last section of the book is all on creating a global change, really what healing looks like, identifying things that you can do to help your children heal if they've been through some of those situations, etc., abuse in the home, etc. So this is from beginning to end, making money, because that was part of funding the
course,
mission.
yeah.
So we have a chapter on amassing wealth and what that looked like, and the charity side, and then the training, etc. But then going into the mission, so that I believe that this will be a very informative book for parents to keep their kids safe, and it's also going to keep you on the edge of your seat, even more than the movie, with riveting every single chapter and going through the details of where these kids came from and their story. And spoiler alert, it's got a happy ending.
There you go.
And,
I love that.
so
Yeah. That's awesome. So when is it coming out?
it's ready now. We literally just finished up the final version of the cover this week. We had our attorneys were going back and forth. They're like, okay, can we use the same? It's The Sound of Freedom, Civ Sound of Freedom, and you can't. I actually patented the name way back even before the movie. Because I was the one that was telling the story of The Sound of Freedom. So I went in and went on the Library of Congress and got the name The Sound of Freedom in book form. But then, you can't really, you can't, there's 100 different books called The Sound of Freedom. So really what you can copyright is the Child Liberation series. So this is going to be the first of a series, because there's 70 plus missions. There's a lot of additional stories that can come in the series. So the attorneys finally said, yep, that works. We've changed the font enough and everything else. So we're not, tying into the movie, but it's the true stories that inspired the film. So it'll be out this next month. You can go to soundoffreedombook.com and pre-order your copy.
Is that where you want everybody to go to be in touch?
Yeah, that would be the best one, because I can tell you a bunch of them: Liberating Humanity, Child Liberation Foundation, all of these different things. But the easiest one to remember is just soundoffreedombook.com, and that'll take you into Liberating Humanity. You can go to liberatinghumanity.com and get information on our healing retreats. You can get links to the Child Liberation Foundation and how you can get involved in there, everything else. So
yeah. This is like Kill Tony that you came on.
That's great. Like the special guest. Thank you so much for having me. Seriously. My first time, guys, so thank you.
Who are you bringing on?
I know, right?
Joe?
Okay. That's right.
Super
Thank you so much.
I
Yeah.
love you. Seriously.
Love you.
Some of our best friends on the planet. We spent some time with you guys last night, and on the way home, Vanessa's like, holy crap.
Yeah, what's the matter with those people?
I know.
She's like, I love those guys so much. It's
Thank
been too long. And so super grateful to you for your friendship, for your support, and grateful to have me on with your podcast too.
Yeah. Thank
my
you so
pleasure.
much.
So thank you, sweetheart.
Yeah.
This was fun.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here, and again, spending some time with us on Arthur's Roundtable. Till next time.